There you go.
Hey, thanks, Zulema. And welcome everybody. It's so great to see everybody. This is kind of classic Zoom, classic Agents of Impact call where I can actually see you, which I like, and it's very gratifying to see so many folks here in Agents of Impact. You all, if you've been on these calls before, know that now would be the time to start introducing yourselves in the chat, and maybe say as much or as little as you like, but maybe at least where you're coming from geographically. And we are trying to move this towards sort of actionable takeaways. So if you have something you want to share, you can do that in the chat. That's often the liveliest part of the call. I want to bring in my two colleagues, Amy Cortez and Dennis Price, who most of you probably know, at least they're from their bylines. Hi, Amy. Hi, Dennis.
Hi, David. Hi, everyone.
And let's just do a little bit of sort of level setting here. This is different than many of our calls, partly because we have so many speakers, partly because times are different. And so we want to be, as Impact Alpha has tried to be in the last couple of weeks, kind of in listening mode. So there's going to be not as much usual back and forth, a little bit at the beginning just to kick us off. But then because we're going to try to move through so many folks, literally like 90 seconds, maximum about 2 minutes from a whole set of folks. And so there's not going to be a chance to kind of debate a lot of things or even get into much depth. We, Impact Alpha, as well as in partnership with y'all, will follow up on everything, including in a literal follow-up to this call, but also just over time on these stories. So this is a time where we're trying to sort of understand what we could be doing to be helpful in terms of what we can cover, what we can bring together in terms of conversations. So that's what we're trying to get from you, and then hopefully we'll be able to give it back to you. One thing we're thinking about too, and everybody should be aware of, is we usually think of this as on the record and open, and we publish the video and we put it up on YouTube and send it around. Folks should be aware that they're being recorded, as we just said. You should be careful what you say, and you own your own words and whatnot. We're not sure whether we should post this, but we'll make that call. But we were also thinking that if anybody wants to quote this is something usually imposed on us journalists, but we're going to now say to everybody, let's just call it Chatham House rules. And if folks don't know what that is, that just means if you're going to quote somebody out of this in a tweet or something else, ask them first. So it's not off the record, it's not on the record, but you're going to check them before you sort of use their words. And we will do the same in our write-ups. And so that's sort of, I think, just keeps everybody, gives everybody a level of security. Now, Dennis and Amy, we're thinking, as I said, about Impact Alpha's coverage, and we've been batting this about a lot over the last couple of weeks in our own meetings. Just give us a thought, Dennis. You had an interesting story the other day. Don Jr. Turned impact investor with his new VC fund. Why did that stand out?
Yeah, thanks, David. Yeah, I mean, there's just going to be a lot of this kind of stuff, and we're already seeing it. But exploiting the sort of contradictions here. So something like Don Jr. joining a impact fund that focuses on conservative companies, an opportunity to promote the case for broader social justice strategies. Or there's this Alliance for Defending Freedom that's mobilizing investors to put pressure on corporations to drop their DEI programs. So you're seeing like folks like take up these impact and market-based strategies. So is there a way to sort of flip them on their head and either should promote sort of existing strategies or at least call out those contradictions? So I'm looking for all sorts of examples in that area.
Calling out contradictions is an emergent theme. Amy, you've been tracking COP and climate, and what are you going to be watching?
Yeah, well, we've been watching the global climate leadership and some of how that is realigning given this U.S. power vacuum. And then a lot of the action is shifting to local jurisdictions, whether states or more local than that, where, there actually is a lot more opportunity for bipartisan action. And also at home, we've been very closely covering the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund and how that is rolling out and being deployed to, continue this inclusive green energy transition. And we're kind of interested in how we keep that moving, given some of the headwinds.
Great. And I see Jessica Pothering on as well, even though it's late there in Lisbon. But Jessica is always reminding me that there is the rest of the world. So Jessica, tell us what you're going to be looking for.
I'm following just sort of what happens to the broader global sustainable development agenda now, and especially, the availability of development finance changes, what happens to global finance institutions and that machinery. We've been following World Bank and IMF reforms, and just as Amy said, in the absence of, a bigger U.S. role or a more uncertain U.S. role, how emerging market communities in particular lean into mobilizing capital locally and regionally and from other resources.
Great. And there's I think there may be some other Impact Alpha team members on, and they can introduce themselves in the chat as well. But let's jump right in. And Rachel Robasciotti, I wanted to start with you. You had a terrific and very thoughtful post out to the beloved impact investing community, and I thought where you ended that was where we might start, which is we need to be ready with ideas, with projects, with people, to be able to move forward. So just say a little bit about how you're thinking.
Absolutely. First, I'm just going to check in and see how the sound is.
I think we need a little more volume if you can. Can we boost it on our end, Isaac?
No, we cannot.
All right, everybody listen closely. No, well, just speak up. Just speak up.
I think she may be coming back and joining from a different source.
Okay, well, Rachel, let's go to Wilson. We'll come back to you, okay, in a sec. So, Wilson, you now get to be the leadoff hitter. One of the things that we have been keying on is.
I'm not sure whether or not you can hear me now. Apologies.
That's a little better. That's a little better. Why don't we take a shot?
Extraordinarily loud.
No, it's not working.
It's not working.
It's just so intermittent. It's hard to follow.
My apologies.
Why don't you log out of the video, call back like on your phone or something, and we'll get at least audio.
Okay.
But Wilson, state level, local, practical, wealth building, shared prosperity. We've been concocting or framing up a North Carolina model. You're there in Durham. You guys came together, I think, just a few days after the election. How did your community there respond?
Yeah, great. Thank you for creating this space, David and team. And if you hear any random noises in the background, I have a very vocal German short-haired pointer now in the other room. So we were able to sit down and get together and have a real strategic conversation about a way forward that wasn't necessarily focused on party or anything of that nature, but really focused on, all right, what are the solutions? Where are the opportunities? What do we do now? And out of that rose 5 major points around education, housing, power, wealth, and health. And the health and education kind of melded together a little bit. So I'll start with that point. One of the things that we see happening across the country in all of our communities are high schools that are now being programmed for workforce. and certain groups are picking what those high schools do. One of the things we want to see in healthcare is we want to see a broad swath of different types of people working in care, whether it be nursing or PA, those first people that people engage once they engage the medical system, to be certain that folks have more of an opportunity to engage someone from a similar background that may be able to be more responsive to their needs and their conditions and their requests and maybe even their illnesses. So we really thought that there was opportunity there to really focus on that. Also helping students understand and kind of change the narrative around what some of these jobs that may be considered baseline jobs in the era where you can do very well by becoming an influencer and different types of things that, you know, may have been opportunities that weren't relevant for my generation, about how you can really have a high quality of life, high paying jobs, great benefits, and great opportunities in the healthcare space at the PA and nurse level, registered nurse level, Bachelor of Science in Nursing level, all these different areas that are very prevalent to frontline healthcare. And just really making sure that folks have an understanding around that opportunity. We also dug into housing. We talked about how to create an increase in home ownership. We're very interested in understanding how we could build incentives for not only home ownership, but businesses in community can develop affordable housing to create more opportunity for folks to continue to live and exist in markets that may be redeveloping. We talked about wealth, you know, how we can look at all these different aspects of wealth that include social capital, that include how to acquire legacy businesses. There are a number of excellent companies that are owned by any demographic across the state of North Carolina, much like any other market. And those businesses may have a horizon due to the age of the owner and no succession plan. So how do we help business owners or people that would be great operators of those businesses acquire those opportunities to own those businesses and keep them thriving in our economic ecosystem, as well as just really doing a deep dive on topics like financial literacy that aren't taught at a high level in grade school. And we have a phenomenal opportunity in North Carolina and the current superintendent for the state that has a deep background in education and can understand and dissect how these types of opportunities would help elevate all socioeconomic levels, because obviously what students are learning at school, they're also bringing home. The lastly I'll touch on, power, is really focused on systematic organization around capital to create more balance. Obviously, we have a state with very significant gerrymandering, and there are some things that need to work towards resolving that so that more voices are heard, and really identify the vacant spaces where we're not showing up, where people aren't in the opportunities to have a voice for all people, and helping people be more vocal in those positions.
That's terrific, Wilson. And as folks may know, your organization is partners in equity and helping Black business owners buy the buildings that their businesses operate in. And as we've written in a variety of contexts, there's a whole range of other things that sort of in a network of folks that you're describing there. And one of them is our new contributing editor, Napoleon Wallace. And folks may know, who read the brief, that we've completed a video documentary. You're in it, Wilson. And we'll be showing that on a future Agents of Impact call, but it sort of describes this interrelated North Carolina model, as we're calling it. You've got a new governor there coming in. There's some opportunities to make progress at the state level, right?
Yeah, we have a new governor, new attorney general, as I mentioned, new superintendent of schools for the state, and all we believe have the right mindset to help drive our economy forward and our program and platforms forward. North Carolina is booming for business, with major corporations deciding to make the state its home. So, you know, we have an opportunity to demonstrate as an example to the rest of the country on how we can work through these times. Obviously, state legislation will be favored going forward. So hopefully our state officials will be able to make some mountain moving decisions that will help catapult an example for the rest of the country to follow.
Terrific, terrific. So bookmark that, everybody. We're going to be looking at these sort of state level, local economies, local programs. There's obviously North Carolina. I'm out here in California. There may be a California model. People have been talking to me about a Northern Colorado model, maybe a New Mexico model. I mean, bring them to us. We want to know what's going on in each locality. Let's go back to Rachel. I think.
Let's give it a shot. I need to know. First
there
of all,
you are. Okay.
Hi, are you hearing the alarm?
Yes, thank you.
No, but you're hearing me, but are you hearing the alarm?
The alarm is not a problem.
That
Don't
is
worry about the alarm.
wonderful.
Yeah,
Okay.
so stay focused.
Okay, yeah, exactly. So this is actually very apropos. I believe that the period that we're going into will be quite like this, in terms of there's going to be a lot of noise, a lot of very distracting noise. And that noise isn't just noise. I believe we're entering a dangerous period of dismantling the systems that have existed before now, because those systems, as we all know, were built on scarcity and fear. And we've been attempting to edit these systems, as those of us who see ourselves as progressives, whether in the impact investing space or otherwise. We've been trying to edit these systems and make them better and work with them for quite some time. And what I really believe is happening is that half of the country has told us that the time for editing is over. It's not working for them. So I believe that this was very much an issue of economic injustice. People said time and time again that the reason they were voting for Trump was about the economics. And I grew up very poor myself, and I know how poverty really inflects the thinking and can really warp the thinking. I don't believe that people were voting necessarily for all of what Trump represents. I do believe they were voting in the demolition crew. And so what that means is a lot of the systems and institutions that if you are financially okay enough, the systems and institutions, we may be working very hard to change them, but they were stable. And these systems and institutions I foresee them being torn down. And it's very important that we remember that as an impact investor, you've been a builder this whole time. You are inside of the system that is unlikely to be torn down completely because it serves those who are in power. It actually serves those right now, the billionaires. Think about who's in his cabinet already, those who are in power, who make their money in the investment world. So this is one of the systems that will more or less stay intact. It will probably have adjustments, likely corruption, but it will more or less stay intact, as you can even hear what Dennis talking about at the top, right? Like how they're even trying to kind of come into the impact investing space. It's going to become extremely important for us to protect ourselves. So I really appreciate the Chatham House rules for this conversation. Continue to understand who we are and what we believe in through the noise, like literally the noise happening right behind me. And it is imperative that we don't vilify or dehumanize the people that voted for Trump, because a lot of those people voted in worker protections, increases to the minimum wage, not across the board, but widely. They're basically saying this doesn't work anymore. I am going to vote for whatever is going to actually change this because I feel lied to about the American dream. And so it's extraordinarily important that we know those are our future allies and that we don't vilify them. We protect our community, we protect one another, and we think about what love would build. What are the systems we would build if we had a clean slate? Because that's what's coming.
I think what you said in the piece was that that very economic precarity that folks are feeling, and the notion of the system being broken in many ways, is also what has motivated many impact investors over time. And so while alliances and allegiances might be shifting, there is kind of a common purpose to be made. Can you just say a little more about that?
Absolutely. It's very easy in our shock and in our fear about having elected Donald Trump. It's very easy to kind kind of other the people that voted for him, but I'm here to tell you, because I think most of us don't come from the impact investing community. I'm here to share with you that when you come from a very poor community and you get your chance for a moonshot, right? You get your chance for somebody that could disrupt things and make them different, you're more likely to follow it. There's a reason that populism is something that is and authoritarianism is something that can come out of situations that are economically precarious. We've seen it in Germany, right? In the 40s, we see it in other times. And so it's very important that we notice that people want the same things that we want. They actually want an economy and a future that works for all. Unfortunately, the issues that impact investors have been leaning on and have been most forward with are not necessarily economic justice. It's kind of been the stepsister of all of the other issues of racial, gender, climate justice. And in reality, we're getting a really clear message from the rest of the country that they aren't going to get on board with those issues unless economic justice is being, and economic precarity is really being addressed. So we should be thinking about in all of our strategies, how does this actually make a better system for all? How are we more inclusive? And that doesn't mean that we have to lose our focus on racial, gender, or climate justice. We just must be inclusive in it, and including those who are not educated, who have not come from the backgrounds that we have.
Thank you so much. And if you can stick around, but that is actually a good segue to Antony Bugg-Levine. So thank you.
I'm here. Thank you.
And thank you for persisting through the noise.
Yes, and thank you all. Appreciate it.
Jumping off point, I think, for the Edmus.
Sorry, David, I lost you there. Can you just repeat the question?
Hear you. Yeah.
We can hear you.
You were breaking up before. What is it with you?
Antony?
Yeah,
Go
David,
ahead.
you were breaking up, so I didn't hear your setup.
My setup was invest in America.
Yeah, so just picking up, first of all, thank you everyone for joining the call, and really picking up what Rachel said. Your piece was great, Rachel. Thank you so much for sharing and telling a story in a way that was personal, but linking to the politics. I just really want to reiterate that, for what Rachel said, that I think when I began this work on impact investing 17 years ago, we had one political party that was largely disdainful of capitalism as morally legitimate. We had another political party that believed in deregulation and free markets. We're in a such better setup as an impact investing movement now than we were 17 years ago, because fundamentally the parties are much more aligned around some, as Rachel said, there are some, not only the parties, but the voters have expressed a point of view that I think we in the impact investing movement would absolutely agree with. So just to reiterate, the economy is not working for everyone. Both parties and a vast majority of voters agree with that. Markets need to be fundamentally fixed. Both parties, vast majority of voters agree with that. I don't think that was true 15 years ago. Capitalism is still the best way forward. I think the vast majority of Americans would agree with that. The investment industry does not serve our national purpose. Too much capital is concentrated in rich places and on the coast, and too much power is being held by the incumbent large financial asset managers. So if you can agree to those fundamental perspectives, so do the vast majority of Americans. And I don't think the impact investing movement has done enough to link what we are doing to what really should be our power base, in that what we offer is consistent with this message you've heard. So I think the people who've reacted to what happened in the election to say, this is proof that we are somehow have to fight back, or this sort of that, I don't think it's a helpful way to frame it. Instead, there's a really powerful opportunity for us to tie what we have always been doing to what is fundamentally a massive majority. It's not everyone. And I think we make the mistake of looking at the extremes and then caricaturing half the country based on the extremes. I'm not saying everyone in this country would agree with the people on this call, but I think the Republicans I know who voted for Trump want to have an American economy in which everyone has a chance to succeed. I really believe that. I think the vast majority of people who voted for Harris similarly want an American economy based on capitalistic principles in which everyone can succeed. We should be able to work as an impact investing movement with all of them, and I think be much more self-conscious. And Rachel said it well, we don't have to change who we are or what we believe to be able to be more effective in communicating what we do and locating it within that national narrative. And so I think this is a huge opportunity. And just going back to Wilson's earlier point, there are a set of things that people on this call do every day that you guys have been covering Impact Alpha for years that I think we could put into a bucket of activities that the vast majority of Americans would consider beneficial and patriotic. We need more affordable housing. We need more home ownership access. Impact investors are working on that. Ownership, employee ownership, and frankly, just ownership of the economy. Lots of really interesting people working on that. There's a general understanding that we have to invest in infrastructure. There's some very interesting impact investing plays there. Small businesses and the opportunity for more people to own and have businesses that thrive and be treated fairly by the financial system. Another area where CDFIs and others have been working on for years. Community banking, the fact that the big mega banks shouldn't necessarily hold all our deposits when there are community banks that could be recycling that money in our communities. Those are not political points of view. I think they are issues that are held and shared by the vast majority of people. And then the issue of regional development. I think if you look at J.D. Vance speeches or you look at Kamala Harris speeches, there's a recognition on both sides that too much economic opportunity is concentrated in too few places. And then there are impact investors and people like Lafayette Square, where I used to work, who are actively pursuing investment strategies to address those issues. So I think about this as an opportunity for us to be more thoughtful of how those pieces that we've been pursuing we've been pursuing them in silos. There's the housing people who do impact investing, there's the small business people. Can we be more effective in connecting those stories to a more coherent narrative that is fundamentally patriotic and that says we as an impact investing movement are aligned with what the vast majority of Americans want to see and how this economy changes. And I think if we do that and we're thoughtful, and I really appreciate Rachel's point about not unintentionally or frankly willfully alienating the allies we should be able to call our own and rather retreating into the people who agree with us on everything. I think if we are more effective in welcoming and creating space so that we don't assume we're talking to people who share our political views, because in fact, there is so much more of this agenda that many more people agree with than just the people who voted for the same president we voted for.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that's what we've been trying to zero in on too, is how can there be a North Star of impact that, at some level it has a longer horizon and a cross-cutting aspect. Are there any other sort of examples that you want to highlight, Anthony, of what investing in America might look like?
Yeah, look, I was really interested, Wilson mentioned earlier, the one of education and health. I think, again, I just go back to what are the things that 80 is an arbitrary number. If you do the political work we've been doing through the Lafayette Square Institute the last year and a half, the number is 60. If you want to get anything major done in the federal government that sticks around, you got to be able to have 60 senators on board. What that means is you cannot limit your agenda to just what one party supports. It also means you don't have to be speaking for everyone. There are absolutely outliers that I'm not saying we have to be Pollyanna or naive about who we work with, but I think we can do a lot more to think about what are those items that 60 senators as a proxy for, a good chunk of the people want to see. So I think ownership is really crucial. I'm so glad that Rudy and Impact Alpha are on that beat. Home ownership, employee ownership, a huge bipartisan. When I've been doing work, going down and meeting with senators, congresspeople from both parties, it is a very easy sell to talk about how investors can make a difference on those two issues. So I think those are really clear. You've covered the work of people like APIS and Heritage on home ownership, guys like Homium who are coming up with ways for first-time home buyers to get onto the housing ladder without having to have the money to put a 20% mortgage down. Really amazing innovation that we should be celebrating and linking to this narrative. I think the small business, the community banking are obvious. Infrastructure I mentioned, I think that's a little bit esoteric. I'm not sure a lot of people wake up and, to Rachel's point, people wake up and think, how do I make sure I can feed my family, pay the rent, and create opportunities for my kids? I think there's a growing sense that if we as a movement could be identified with helping to keep bridges and tunnels and roads safe and productive, that's something that, again, could be winning on multiple fronts. But I'd love to hear from people on this call. What else? I think with education, again, I'm not sure a lot of people want to see the private sector engaged in education all the time. And then I think a big issue is around climate. I think there's a way to do climate that is tying into the majority of Americans who believe climate change is real and we need to do something about it. And I think there's another way to do climate that is alienating and can read partisan. So, but I don't think we need to dismiss that.
Thank you, Anthony. And that's a perfect jump on off point. Dennis, you want to?
Yeah, let's thanks, Anthony. And sticking on narrative and sticking on climate, frankly, let's bring in Taj Eldridge from Include Ventures and Jobs for the Future. Taj, you do a lot of work in climate, but you do it and think about it and frame it in a way that connects broadly, I think. Tell us a bit how you're thinking about your work post-election.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dennis. I think a lot of times when we think about diversity, we're very binary. We think about it in race and gender. What we've left out, what has been said here, is the fact that there needs to be geographic diversity as well as educational attainment diversity. I often wear many hats in the climate space. When I was making investments indirectly, whether it's with startup companies like SparkCharge and others, or as a fund-to-fund manager into firms like the 22 Fund and many others that are here and impactful. We saw the other shift of that is that we need to also talk about the job opportunities. And this was way before the election. So 3 years ago, we partnered with Aries Charitable Foundation and Jobs for the Future to focus on training and placing people into quality green jobs. And I put the quality on that too, because we have to ensure that these jobs are providing dignity. These jobs are providing an opportunity for economic mobility. One of the things I made sure to do was that we just didn't concentrate on people who had PhD degrees, who had master's degrees, people who went to college. We focused on people with associate's degrees, people who went straight from high school, because we needed to have that robust majority that was focused on this idea. Now, my graduate degree is in economics, and I've often said that my undergraduate degree in poetry is what helped me a lot because language matters. For me, I care not what you call it. I care about your behavior and I care about your actions. So if we were talking about this funding where we funded places like University of Tennessee in Knoxville or Louisiana, Greater New Orleans Foundation, or other cities and places like that, where the idea is to train and place people for jobs, the idea of this of the economic push that's been happening kind of dissipates, and then they get pulled into the idea of climate. So for us, I think as we're talking about the idea of climate and we're talking about the idea of how can we move it forward, I think the song that you played early to begin this was apropos. Don't Stop If People Don't Know It's Fleetwood Mac. It talks about don't stop believing until tomorrow. Don't stop because it'll soon be here. And tomorrow will be here. For us, that's focused on climate. 2030 will be here. So what we have to think about now is how do we live within the environment that we have? How do we live with the proposed energy secretary that's coming to place? And how do we get people to live behind what we're thinking about when it comes to the climate movement? And economics may be it. So job opportunities may be it. Lastly, I would say there was a young voter that was in the New York Times that said the reason they voted for Trump was that they worked for an auto manufacturing facility and that they were against EVs because she lost her job. But what if that person realized that she too could get a job in the EV manufacturing industry for local companies that are here? Will her thoughts change? Will her ideas change? And so I think that's one of the things we all have to do is understand how our language matters, understand how we can listen more, understand how diversity needs to be expanded. Lastly, I would say, Dennis, and the reality of it is, as a person, as a Black man living in America, we cannot deny that the isms in our country are wide and both deep. However, I think that if we focus on the things that we can control, like the economic mobility of others, that's when we will see a lot of the change.
Great.
Thanks, John.
Now we're going to be moving fast here. So there's plenty more in what everybody's saying, but let's move to Tracy Gray at the 22 Fund. Tracy, you're helping folks export. It's kind of different world of export, maybe. I don't know. How are you thinking about your work and the work ahead?
Well, we invest in manufacturers and hardware to help them export because we believe exports give hardware and manufacturing venture-like growth. A lot of money doesn't go into that part of climate. But the three things I wanted to mention, number one, I think I'm part of the freedom economy with Rachel. And one thing we have done and what Ford Foundation has done, Roy Swan, is to do what Don Jr. and those guys are doing. They're flipping the narrative of impact investing to be about their bad stuff, whereas we can make patriotism and economy about the good stuff. And so that's really what the freedom economy also does with that name and being on the offensive. The second point I wanted to make is another point from Rachel, is if you look at everything holistically, climate justice is an economic justice frame. You cannot be healthy economically if your environment is to shit. Excuse my language. So I think we need to think holistically in the way we look at impact investing. That's why we call ourselves holistic investors and not impact investors. Number three, the next thing I think that we really need to do, and it sounds simple, and maybe it's because I'm in Hollywood and most of my friends are storytellers, we have to tell the story better in language that people understand. We, quote, we own Hollywood. Hollywood is with us, but we're not leveraging them in the simple language that the right and the destruction has been able to do in the past. And I think Taj is part of clean climate culture or something. Storytelling, the storytellers, the artists are what gets everything, every bad time through, right? Because they come up first. So we need to really figure out how to make the story sound better. How does manufacturing sound better? How does climate sound better? How do we talk about our economic justice in a way that makes people think they can get to the top? They voted for Trump because Trump is talking about the top. We're talking about helping the poor. That makes them psychologically think like they are poor and they don't want to be there. So out of my three, number one is to really involve the storytellers. And I can help do that because all my friends are storytellers and artists here in Hollywood.
Great. Thank you so much, Tracy. Smitha Das from Wes.
Yeah.
Just jump right in.
Yeah, thanks, David. And thanks to Impact Alpha for convening this space to reflect and to be in community with one another. I find it really helpful. Often in this world, we've been talking about wealth and income inequality as a systemic risk. We talk about it as a risk to our investment portfolios, ultimately society and democracy. And I think recent events have really seen that play out. And so what I'm taking away, looking at the exit polling results, I think, Rachel and Anthony said this really well, that the economy was ranked as the most important issue for voters in deciding who they voted at the top of the ticket. And so what I'm thinking about is how, at least at Wes and within my world that I sit in, how I can be and my team can be more resolute than ever to address the root causes of income and wealth inequality, right? If we truly believe that, as we've seen, it's a systemic risk. And so you look at the concentration of wealth, I don't need to say the numbers here, but how do we address that wealth gap? And that's where we come back to the concept that the wealth gap is an ownership gap. And how do we address that? Wilson already said this well, but we can try to increase access to asset ownership for those who have been historically locked out. And so we have a portfolio. We've invested in 13 different investments across different partners who are increasing access to financial asset ownership, home ownership, employee ownership, community real estate opportunities. But I think kind of what I'll kind of end with for this group is it's not just kind of leaning into the power that we can do as investors, but I think particularly as I see the news every day, it's just key to remember that we have significant power as investors and in the role that we play in the markets. And so regardless of I live in DC, so regardless of what happens in my backyard, we still have significant influence and ability to move the needle. And so I just want to kind of reiterate that for this group, and hopefully that gives kind of increased determination to move forward with conviction. Yeah.
Agency, as in agents of impact, and ownership, two big themes. Thank you, Smitha.
Yeah.
John Shell, I don't know, I don't quite see you on my front screen here. Are you with us?
I'm probably on a back screen where I belong.
There you are. Good.
Look, I had a whole 90-second thing that I was going to say, but Antony, Rachel, Wilson at the start said a lot, much more eloquently than I can. We do investing in ownership, much like Smith at Wes, and we do some policy change on this too. So I think I'm going to flip to a story. Our biggest investment is with a private equity fund based in Pennsylvania, where we invest in companies then to sell them on to ESOPs, 100% ESOPs. And the guy who I invest with is a Republican, right? So he and I, we don't agree on anything except when we start talking about how the economy works. And then we agree on everything. And I think that's what this election revealed to us, is there is a real alignment around the stuff that we, at least on the ownership side, like I get that there's a bunch of stuff where it's not agreement, but when it's the structure of the economy and ownership is an area of real agreement. And It's unclear whether this administration will be able to deliver on that, but the energy behind the election of Trump is about that. And I think for us, as we think about the next, whatever it is, 2 or 4 years, what Tracy said about accessible language, I think is so important. When I joined this community 6 or 7 years ago, I had no idea what anyone was talking about. I really didn't. It took a long time to understand the language that the impact world uses. I don't think that's okay anymore. I think there are people who are allies who just don't understand what we're talking about most of the time. And the second thing I'll say, and then I'll stop, is, you know, some of us, our funds are, you know, funded by those who are a product of the current financial and corporate system, right? People who would be opposed to the kind of things that we know will change systems. I don't think we can be afraid of those conversations, right? If we are going to capitalize on the energy around ownership and other things that might shift and break our system, we need to be willing to be opposed to some of the people who fund our work, who may not be aligned. And I think that's a challenge for us, but one I think we can rise up to.
Yeah, thank you so much for raising that, John, and some of that is coming up in the comments as well, which is, you know, that just as the contradictions are becoming clear on one side, they'll also become clear on our side or the other side, and as you said, lean into them and drive them. I always think, like, if the parties are competing to be working class parties, that's not a terrible thing, and there's going to be a lot of places to play, and let's hold everybody to their words and to their accountability. Let's bring in Morgan Simon, who had a guest post with 3 invitations for folks the other day. And thank you, Morgan. Are you up?
I am up. Good morning, everyone.
Yeah.
What I've been appreciating and kind of thinking in this post-election moment, our work as impact investors has always, in my mind, been 2 things. It's to fight for the change that we want to see, particularly in the context of big public corporations, and then that we want to see. And I think in this moment, we're called to perhaps shift our tactics within that. First, on the corporate side, I've been thinking a lot about how executing the Trump agenda is often going to need corporations to get in line, right? That even on the last quarterly earnings call from Geo Group of how excited they are to feel like they'll be able to fulfill their 18,000 bed capacity and what that's going to mean for the bottom line. And for those of us who are very active on looking at private prisons and then also tech groups and surveillance and kind of all the infrastructure that makes money in the context of even the consideration of mass deportations, that it's a really critical time for us to be looking at who will profit from these policies. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah.
Great.
Beautiful.
And I'm really curious of who's following the money for climate. And would love if someone can raise their hand on that, because I feel very sadly well educated in terms of the immigration side, less educated on the climate side, and think that these are the sorts of conversations that we need to be doing more on, of where are the openings to be able to shift in this moment. Second is knowing that building economic power precedes political power. That's where the critical work in building the future through impact investment really comes in. And I think a lot of that we've been doing, you know, and in the context of Candide Group and the work that we do in supporting, whether it's worker co-ops and ESOPs and land ownerships and groups like Partners in Equity and renewable energy ownership. We've always had a geographic emphasis. So things like our Olamina Fund had a minimum of 25% rural investments, 25% investments in Native American country, and really thinking about how do we make sure that we're building economic power in all states, not just blue states. But I don't think that we have done enough as a movement to think about how we then parlay building economic power into political power. So that's another conversation I'm really interested in having with people in this community and do not have figured out yet.
Good, terrific. Thank you, Morgan. Again, sorry, we're moving on so way too quickly, but Bryant Sewell, congratulations. We just had, I think, a notice in the brief this morning that you're the new co-director of Majority Action and thinking about, you know, shareholder engagement, corporate accountability. Where do we go?
Absolutely. And thanks, David. And a lot of this conversation has deeply resonated with me. But I just want to take a moment to remind us of how much power we really have as investors, even amidst this adversity, especially when there's the potential for an out of control administration that exhibits demonstrably harmful actions. Rational investors still recognize the need to deal with these risks. And I just want to take a step back and remind us of just all of the accomplishments that have been made under the previous administration as an indication of how we can potentially continue to move forward. So if you look back in 2017, we saw large oil majors set two-degree scenario targets, where climate investor-related breakthroughs had taken more than 20 years to do so, to get to that point. In 2018, we saw gun manufacturers majority votes at gun manufacturers on risk associated with gun violence and public safety. 2019, we saw major banks and financing institutions, including and as well as private prisons, have shareholders put forth proposals that again got majority votes. And lastly, we saw the ousting of Lee Raymond, the principal architect of corporate climate denialism, from the leadership of JP Morgan Chase, the largest the largest fossil fuel financer in the world. So it was organizing and these breakthroughs that set us up for even bigger investor wins on climate, workers' rights, and racial equity that have occurred in the last 4 years. And it's just important to note that that's not to say that we'll be doing the same thing as we did in 2017, because so much has changed. And the truth is we can't really predict what is going to work, as we couldn't back then. So the fact that we don't have all the answers right now, I think is just par for the course. We just know that we have to roll up our sleeves and really get to work. And yeah, I just want to lastly close by saying, even in the face of this Trump administration and anti-ESG pushbacks, it's important that we really recognize that we win when we connect investor-led corporate accountability initiatives to real people's lives and real people's concerns. It was a grassroots energy that reshaped the debate on climate change, gun safety, and workers' rights and racial equities. And the investor campaigns that won the most, that covered the most terrain, were those that tapped into that power.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Brian. I know Claire Mattingly has to leave at the top of the hour, so you got 3 minutes or 2 minutes, Claire, but give us a little bit of the specific policy landscape.
Yeah, thank you, David, and the whole Impact Alpha team, and everything that has been said has been really, really helpful and has resonated. So thank you all. At the U.S. Impact Investing Alliance, we're a nonprofit field building organization and have a long track record of working to support the principles of impact investing in a bipartisan way. So we have a lot of thoughts, and we're also taking in information from our partners to figure out the path ahead. I would say we're thinking about what we need to do in 3 main buckets. The first is we really need to defend progress made where we can. And I think if there's one silver lining of all of the politicization of impact investing principles, whether it's ESG or DEI, is that our field has really had to mobilize and coordinate. And we now have better infrastructure and have flexed the muscle to kind of defend our field. And we're not so much on the back foot on that respect anymore. The second way we need to be engaging is pushing for incremental progress where we can. At the Alliance, we're thinking a lot about frames around shared prosperity and advancing American economic competitiveness, which really relates, I think, to what many on this call have already said, so I won't dwell there. And then the third bucket is we need to lay the groundwork. In addition to incremental progress, we need to lay the groundwork for more transformational policy changes in the future. The life cycle of policy is quite long, and so we need to be able to hit the ground running as windows of opportunities arise, whether it's, in a few months in the state level engagement, whether it's after the midterms in 2 years if the power dynamic shift, or several years from now. That needs to be started right in this moment as well. But if I could, leave you with one thing, and many have already said this, I would say that, policy is a team sport, and maybe the best thing we can do right now is lean on our coalitions and continue to build those up. All those three buckets that I just laid out, it's a lot, and not one organization can take them all on. We need folks who are diving deep on local issues, state engagement. We need folks who are thinking about litigation strategies, who are thinking about investing in our democratic institutions. And so I hope that we continue to lead on our networks, forums such as these, the groups like Freedom Economy that Rachel and others mentioned. The U.S. Impact Investing Alliance also co-leads a coalition on inclusive economic growth with B-Lab. If folks are interested, I can share more. But that, I think, is maybe the most important thing, is we need to be aligned.
Terrific. Thank you, Claire. And that's actually, I should have mentioned this earlier, but there's a second call that Mission Investors Exchange is doing tomorrow. We had the link in the brief this morning. And Fran Siegel, Claire's colleague, will be on that, as well as Cynthia Matthews from Kellogg and some other agents of impact. So that kind of continues the conversation. We are at the hour. We're going to go a little bit longer because there's a couple more folks. So if you can stay around, stick around. Obviously, if you have to jump, thank you for joining. And Jess Remington, a Next Economy strategist. I was going to have you finish up, but I know you got to jump. Tell us about how to think about new narratives.
Thanks, y'all. I'm so grateful how many people mentioned on this call narrative, messaging changes needed, combating misinformation and propaganda, and getting opportunities for real change out to a wider audience, even unlikely allies. I'm here representing a 15 organization coalition called the Beloved Economies Collaborative for Narrative Infrastructure, a new initiative being incubated by Full Spectrum Capital Partners. We're working together to create communications infrastructure and messaging research, narrative infrastructure that will connect mainstream audiences to the well-proven solutions for inclusive economies, whether that's related to guaranteed income, worker power, shared ownership, and returns, and more. So in the wake of the election, there's a call to build and adapt a better media communications ecosystem that actually effectively reaches a broader tent of people, and a need for better storytelling on existing pro-worker policies. As well as, of course, greater adoption of more progressive pro-worker agendas into policy. So that's what we're working on. We're already set up to make a significant dent in that. We're launching in early 2025 after a year of careful strategy and planning across organizations. So my call essentially is to join us, since it's an all hands on deck situation. I put in the chat how to be in touch, the website. There's 3 things you can do. One is we have a funder learning action component on what it actually takes to fund and build narrative infrastructure. So if that's something you're interested in learning about, helping design, let us know. 2, if you know of other kindred narrative power efforts, it sounds like there's a few on this call, please tell us about them. We need a broad coalition. And 3, if this is really exciting to you, we're about to wrap up our raise end of Q1 for philanthropic capital. We're about halfway through. So if you can help or know people who can, let us know, because we got to all do this all hands on deck. Thanks.
Thank you, Jess. And then one more, at least on the list. I don't know whether other folks want to put their hands up, but I met Aaron Fisher recently from Change Agent and asked him whether we could be programming the AI for positive social impact, and he said yes. So Aaron, tell us. We've thought maybe the election is not the most disruptive thing on the horizon. Maybe AI is. What are the possibilities?
Yeah, absolutely. Can you hear me okay? We're good?
Yep.
Great. So yes, I'm the CEO and co-founder of Change Agent AI. We built the first generative AI platform that's specifically for social impact and advocacy. And so we're basically providing power to the mission-based organizations that are going to be on the front lines of addressing the harm that's coming, and also, charting a path forward from here. And I would really encourage everyone on this call to ask themselves a question, which is, technology is already reshaping our society. It's been doing that all the time. How are we making sure that our values are being advanced through that technology? Because AI is very rapidly reshaping our society, and billions of dollars just flowed into XAI, which is Elon's AI company, which doesn't match my values. And billions of dollars just flowed into ChatGPT, into OpenAI. And a lot of that money was raised by the Kushners and Peter Thiel, who also, their values don't align with mine either. And if they don't align with yours, I think it's really important that you invest in companies, especially AI companies, that actually do. So at Change Agent AI, we've had this idea that language models really shouldn't just perpetuate racism, misogyny, homophobia. But that's exactly what will happen when you train models on Reddit and you train models on, you know, the New York Post and a lot of other sources from the internet that frankly really perpetuate the worst parts of our society and really don't give a lot of attention to people who don't have power. I think our higher angels are better ideals. And so, you know, what we're doing is providing a platform for people. Honestly, I love it. I just went after Jess, to people, organizations, and networks to be able to leverage AI that's built specifically for them. So we've already got people who are saving, you know, 75 to 90% of their time on a variety of tasks, whether that's content generation or data analysis, translation, to be able to make the world a better place. Sometimes that looks like apolitical efforts to, you know, could be feed the hungry or whatever else. Sometimes that's more political and people who are actively advocating. But I hope when you're thinking about how you use your dollars, right, how you're going to invest to reshape society in the context of a second Trump administration, that you understand that technology is a way that can sort of alter everything, right? It's kind of in the soil. Everything that's going to grow from this moment, technology can have an impact on that. So we actually did just start a seed round. If you're interested, and I'm at Aram at the change.ai. I'll put that in the chat in a second here. But you know, as you think about what comes next, please don't just let the billions of dollars from these other people who are just looking to make as much money as possible without any kind of other concerns dominate what comes next, because there really are alternatives, and I hope that you will consider them. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, we're a few minutes over, but just want to bring Amy and Dennis back up. I'm not sure if other folks have raised their hand to speak, but it seems to me that the themes are emerging, are common cause on economic justice, on raising incomes, raising ownership, you know, increasing ownership. I think that, you know, it's as simple as share the wealth, which was a slogan, you know, back in the day. And we could judge a lot of things based on how effective they are in driving wealth down the so-called pyramid. And another one we've heard obviously is around narrative change, and sort of both in who we're speaking to and how we're speaking and what stories we're telling. What else stood out for you, Dennis and Amy?
I thought, coming back to something Morgan was saying, just remembering like the tools investors have at their in their tool sets, you know, have sort of got us to this far, and then some of that will be opportunities to continue to push forward in the coming years. But there's also like a resistance element to it when needed, and particularly on private prisons. So I think there's going to be plenty and interesting and hard work to be done around finding opportunities in alignment with the current agenda, but using the tools where needed to push back on it too.
Yeah. Go ahead. You're muted. Yeah.
Okay. On that note, I've been kind of fascinated by the strange bedfellows coming together with this administration. Like, who knows what is going to happen? But the New York Times had a great article over the weekend about RFK picking a fight with big food and all the chemicals in food and all the sugar that's leading to obesity. Like, these are issues. I remember writing about this for the New York Times like 20 years ago, right? And like, we've gotten nowhere. So in this creative destruction and this like tear it down kind of thing that he's going to do, like, I think there is opportunity. And Rachel, I think you said, let's remember we're builders. There, you know, there is this weird opportunity maybe to make progress, and we have models and good ideas. So when all of that stuff, you know, comes tumbling down, we're there with the ideas, and we should be making common cause where we can.
I think that's words to the wise. Amy and I both are old tech reporters. We both kind of grew up on the notions of disruptive innovation and whatnot. I think when we thought that there was going to be a new economy, transformation of the economy, we all knew at some level there would be disruptions. We've certainly had some. This certainly is one. And as some folks have said, you know, don't let a good disruption go to waste. So I'm very heartened by all the work everybody on this call is doing all across the landscape of agents of impact. We, Impact Alpha, will endeavor to be helpful and value added in this context, and to keep bringing folks together and letting you know what each other are doing. So keep bringing your ideas and your projects and your deals and your investments and your strategies to us, and we'll push it back out to everybody else. We'll do a kind of roundup. We'll have to think about how to handle Chatham House rules, which we've now imposed on ourselves. So be ready for a note from us, seeing if we can use some of your comments. And with that, I think we'll let it go for now. There's plenty more to be said in future calls. Keep watching the brief. If you're not on the brief, you should subscribe. You could at least get the free open, and you'll know about these calls. So thank you to everybody, and take good care.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye.